child revolution, where healing and consciousness spark transformation, helping you to reclaim your power and create the life you were meant to live.
Welcome back to the Inner Child Revolution. I am your host, Nico Anna Jean. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most confusing places to land in this work. It is the place where inner child healing meets manifesting meets spiritual awakening. And instead of freedom, it turns into a kind of quiet self-punishment. And I want to talk about what happens when you try to hold I create my reality, quote unquote, in the same hand as this happened to me. Okay, especially when this was a narcissistic person or a narcissistic family system or organization. So here's the thought that I want to start with. If it's true that I create my reality and that this is the harvest of seeds, so-called, that I planted, then I must be a bad person because look what I planted. Isn't that the thought? Like the 3 a.m. version of that thought? I attracted this, so something must be wrong with me. Something in me called this in, or something in me thought I deserved it or matched it or I wanted it on some level that I can't see. So if that thought has ever landed in your body, I want you to know something first. That's not spiritual work. That's not consciousness expanding. That's the same shame that you have carried as a child. It's just wearing a new costume with better vocabulary, but it is the same voice. It just learned some new words, okay? Let me say that again. It's the same voice. It just learned some new words. So let's talk about why that feels impossible to resolve, because there is a real reason. The thought can't resolve because it's being asked in the wrong frame or paradigm. You see, separation consciousness runs on judgment. That's the whole engine. The mind is constantly sorting out, this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong, this one deserves, this one doesn't, this is the victim, this is the perpetrator. And everything that comes into awareness has to get judged and just put in a pile or filed in certain files. So it's not a personality flaw, but that's just what separation consciousness does. That's what we're all in most of the time. And it can't function without judgment. Judgment is how it knows what anything is. So when the mind tries to hold the idea of I create my own reality while still running on that engine, there is only one place it can land, and it has to produce a verdict. And the verdict has to fall on somebody. If the verdict falls on them, we're in victimhood, and that doesn't feel like power either. Well, if the verdict falls on us, then we're the bad person who attracted a bad thing. See, it's very black and white that way. Either way, somebody's guilty, because inside separation, someone always has to be, because that's what the machine was built to produce. That's why this question spins forever. It's not because the answer is hidden, but the frame itself requires a judgment, and no judgment is ever going to feel like freedom. So before we go any further, I have to say this, because without it, the rest of what I'm about to share just becomes the exact thing we're trying to get out of, okay? The work comes first. The part of you that was hurt, that has to be witnessed, the child has to be met. This inner child has to be witnessed and met where they are. So the boundary has to be set with the person or the organization or the pattern, the narcissistic dynamic inside, the way we learn to override ourselves and abandon ourselves, make ourselves small, or make ourselves responsible for someone else's feelings. That has to be named, and it has to start shifting in the body. So that comes first. I want to be really clear about that. So you can hold the understanding I'm about to share intellectually while you're still doing that work. It's very important. Sometimes the understanding actually helps because it gives you a bigger ground to do the work from. But the understanding is never a substitute for the work. So you have to do the work you have to meet yourself where you're at in your current 3D reality, right? Because here's what happens if you try to jump straight into the oneness paradigm without doing that work. You're not in oneness because you're in dissociation with a really beautiful vocabulary. And dissociation is exactly what the child learned to do to survive in the first place. So the bypass version of the teaching actually re-wounds the child by asking her to do the same thing that broke her heart, which is leave her body, leave the truth of what happened, and float up into an idea where nothing is real and nothing hurts. That's not what we're doing here. So I want to be really, really clear about that. We're not saying that what you feel isn't real or what happened to you isn't real. Okay, it's real. It's real on this plane of reality. So the child gets held first always, all right? But okay, with that as the groundwork, let's talk about the frame that actually dissolves the question. Here's the shift. And this is what the New Thought author and mystic Neville Goddard comes in. He is someone who I have extensively studied and learned so much from in the past few years. Neville Goddard says that your whole world is yourself pushed out. The whole world, yourself pushed out. Okay, that's not a law of attraction version of you attracted this. That's a misunderstanding of the law. That's something much bigger. That's saying there is no separate world out there that you're broadcasting into and hoping it responds. The world is you experiencing yourself as what it looks like a separate world, but you are consciousness itself. You are the I am, which Neville says is God, is the I am. And Neville also puts forward a most radical proposition that God is your own human imagination. So the field is not something outside of you. The quantum field. People say the field a lot, and I think they're referring to the quantum field. So I'm going to say the field when I mean quantum field. So the field is you experiencing yourself as a separate self. Every state of consciousness that exists lives inside you because you're the container of all of it. And Neville says something else. He says, God is playing all the parts. Have you ever heard that? I just want you to sit with that for a moment, because those are not two separate teachings from him, but they're two ways of saying the same thing. If the whole world is yourself pushed out, then of course God is playing all the parts. There's no one else to play them. Okay, let that land for a second. Which is why it can be so frustrating and maybe confusing when you're experiencing something in your external world that's not comfortable. And then someone might say to you, oh, well, you know, if there's something out there that you don't like in your life, that it just means that it's a reflection of something inside you. And that can be hard to swallow, especially if it's really harmful. Or maybe it's something that's very violent or damaging or destructive. So, like I said, that's where we have to really understand the paradigm of oneness. This is the spiritual traditions have been talking about this for eons. That God is playing all the parts, and there is only one of us here. So, at that level of I am being the unconditioned consciousness. There's no good and there's no bad. Okay, there's no wrong self and right self. There's no separate you over here and separate them over there having a transaction where someone's attracting somebody else or something else. There's one consciousness experiencing itself through the game of a limited separate self, so it can eventually remember it was never actually limited and never actually separate. So that's the game. That's why we came here. We came here to play a game. We pretended we were small and limited in order to remember that we are actually infinite beings. We're one. We're the same infinite being showing up as separate selves. And the remembering is the whole point. So, in that frame, the whole moral apparatus dissolves. Not because harm doesn't matter on the 3D level, it absolutely does. Your inner child was hurt, and that stays true. But at the level of I am, morality is not the organizing principle anymore. Remembering who you are is the organizing principle. I was just telling someone yesterday about the evolution of this work is that we really do the deep inner work with reparenting the inner child, and we revisit painful memories, and we give the child what they needed that they didn't get back then, and we hold people accountable for what they did, and we allow the child to be a victim. And as we do this more and more, and as rapport is built between us and the inner child, and ourselves and the inner child, and the inner child turns towards us and trust is rebuilt, there's this beautiful thing that happens if you're open to it, where at some point the integration creates this sort of new way of seeing things in which you're able to see that you're actually becoming God's child, or source if you prefer that word, or a universe, a child of the universe, in which, if that's true, if you're a child of the unlimited source of all life, of consciousness itself, you have unlimited resources. You are unlimited. Okay? And I was just telling someone that yesterday, and it is an evolution. So we're not trying to skip the work on the 3D reality level, but it is a path. It's a path to spiritual awakening, and it's a beautiful path. But I want to come back to something. Let's talk about, what does this mean about dealing with a narcissistic person or family system or organization in your life. Okay, if the whole world is yourself pushed out and God is playing all the parts, then that person was not a separate bad self attacking a separate good self. But at the level of the I am, they were a part of the one consciousness playing the role that had to be played so we would stop looking outside of ourselves for source. So you have to just know that your higher self is giving you the experiences in life that you need in order to look within and remember that your source is within and not without. Sometimes nothing gentler would have worked for you. If something gentler could have moved us, then we would have chosen something gentler. So that encounter, as painful as it was, or maybe is currently for you, and as real as the harm was or is, one of the sharpest possible invitations to wake up out of separation, because separation is exactly what the dynamic runs on. Somebody has to be the source, and someone has to need the source. Someone has to be the God, and someone has to be the worshiper. Somebody has to be right, and somebody has to be wrong. You see what I'm saying? In the narcissistic dynamic, that's how it works. But you can't stay asleep in this separation consciousness and then move into oneness and stay in that same dynamic. Something has to give, and the dynamic has to go. And so you really have to wake up. Either way, you have to wake up. I can tell you this from personal experience and from working with so many clients, is that after you do the work and you get to a point of healing where you can really feel a lot of relief, and maybe you don't even have to necessarily be at a point of forgiveness, and you don't have to drop your boundaries that you put up to protect yourself so that you could heal, but you're able to start getting some perspective, and you're able to even see, wow, if I hadn't have had this experience with this person in my life, if I hadn't have felt betrayed, if I hadn't have had to, to actually separate myself from people who were supposed to love and support me, I wouldn't have had this awakening. I wouldn't have, had whatever it is for you. There's so many things that these kinds of challenges can bring, the gifts they can bring into our life. So this is where the inner child piece becomes essential again. Okay, I'm just going to say this now. The child can't hold what I just said, right? The child can't comprehend this deep, consciousness work. That's not the child's job. So if we try to hand the child the whole world is yourself pushed out and God is playing all the parts, that's really abandoning the inner child. And what the inner child hears is your pain doesn't matter. Look at the bigger picture, get over it. That's not reparenting. That's just the same erasure of the child's experience, what she already survived, or he or she, in spiritual language. And the inner adult's the one who holds both truths at once. You have to hold both of these truths at the same time. You have to hold this happened, it hurt, and it was not okay. You were not wrong to be hurt by it. I am here now, and I will not leave you again. And at the same time, on the inner adult level, you can say, at the level I can see from now, there is only one of us here. And you don't have to hand that to your inner child, but you can hold that for both of you. That's some advanced consciousness work. That's the work of the inner adult in oneness consciousness. So never using the higher truth to shut the child up, never using the child's pain to stay stuck in separation, but both at once. The child gets to be fully believed about what happened, and the adult gets the freedom of remembering what the child was never in a position to see. And here, carefully, once, I want to name the deepest layer of this, okay? If you're a Star Trek person, you already have a picture for this, like the holodeck, right? You guys, are you a Star Trek fan? I'm a big Star Trek fan. And a whole world that feels completely real while you're in it, if you're in the holodeck. So you can get hurt in there, you can fall in love in there, you can forget it's a holodeck. But the moment the program ends and you remember, you are the one who walked in and you're the one running the program the whole time. That's not just a science fiction idea. It's a serious conversation in physics and philosophy right now. There's a book called The Simulation Hypothesis by Rizwan Virk. He's an MIT computer scientist, and he lays out the case that what we're calling reality has all the features of a simulation, that we may literally be inside something very much like a holodeck. And when you put that next to what Neville Goddard was saying almost 100 years ago, the whole world is yourself pushed out, God is playing all the parts, then you start to see that they're pointing at the same thing from different directions. So a mystic in the 1940s and an MIT computer scientist in the 2020s arriving at the same place from opposite ends of the room. We came here on purpose. We came here to play the part of a limited being. And we got so good at that part, we forgot it was a part. And the remembering is the whole reason we came. So that teaching held from separation can be a weapon, but held from oneness, after the work has been done and the child has been protected, it is one of the most liberating truths there is. Because inside it, there is no one to be mad at. Not them, not us. There is only the one consciousness playing every part, remembering itself through every encounter, including the ones that hurt the most. How can God be wrong? How can we be mad at ourselves for showing up as another self and playing the part that we needed so we could grow past where we would have stayed if we had stayed comfortable? So when the 3 a.m. thought comes back, and it will come back because these patterns don't dissolve in one podcast episode, okay? Here's what I want you to remember. The question, did I attract this bad thing because I'm a bad person? It's not the wrong question because the answer is scary. It's the wrong question because it's being asked from inside a framework, a paradigm where no answer will ever feel like real freedom. We're not here to be good. We're here to remember. In this encounter, the one that hurt you so much that you couldn't spiritual bypass your way out of it, and the one that finally forced you to stop looking outside yourself for source, that encounter was not evidence that something is wrong with you. It was one of the sharpest invitations you were ever going to get to wake up. The inner child needed to be held first, and that work is not skippable, and it never will be. But on the other side of that work, waiting, is a remembering that no shame can survive inside of. You are the I am. You always were. And this whole thing was a game you came here to play so you could remember. If this episode is landing somewhere in you, I want to point you towards two things. The first is my free masterclass The 4-step method to break toxic cycles and become the coach you're meant to be. And it's about how the inner child might be running your business, your leadership, and your ability to receive, and how reparenting shifts those patterns underneath it all. The link is in the show notes, and it's always open. The second is my book, Healing the Inner Child with EFT Tapping. And if you want a place to start meeting your child in your body, your inner child that is, not just your mind story, that book is the entry point, and the link is also in the show notes. You didn't come here to be good. You came here to remember. This is the Inner Child Revolution, and I'll see you next time.